Hey, what's up? It's Jared Hill, and today we're going to take a look at the Sony 35mm 2.8 FE lens with Zeiss coating on the glass. This is a fantastic lens. It's one of the more compact lenses that you can get for the E-mount series of lenses for these Sony full-frame cameras. So the full-frame cameras such as the A7S, the A7 II, and that whole line except the E-mount lenses, and that's what this is. This particular lens I picked up because I wanted a more compact lens, something that was really small that kept the camera really small. As you can see, this camera with this lens on it is very small. It's about the size of most point-and-shoot cameras that have some sort of optical zoom in them. Most of these cameras are relatively thin these days, and then you put once you extend the lens a little bit, it's about this large. So for me, this is very able to be traveled with. One of the issues that I always had, I'd look for a small camera that I can carry with me when we go on family trips and do stuff. However, it would always fall short of the quality of what I would get with my DSLR. And by DSLR, I mean my big Canon 5D Mark III, which is large, and then if you throw on any lens on that camera, it's still a large camera. However, this A7S or the A7 II combined with this FE 2.8 35mm lens, it's a very small package and you're able to capture just beautiful photos. So at 35mm, this being a prime lens, which means no zoom, it's a fixed lens at 35mm, my concerns were, how is this going to look when I take pictures of people? Because usually when I have a wider lens like a 28mm or 24 or even 35mm lens, I get maybe a little bit of distortion, or if I take a picture of a person, it bloats their face out a little bit, as opposed to a more zoom lens like 70mm or even 200mm, which the compression on that particular photo is a little bit better and it makes the person look a little more appealing. However, this lens works fantastic. Because this lens is so small, it is a go-to lens for me a lot of the time, because when I go places with my family and I have 3 kids and I can't be messing around with big cameras and all this stuff like I try to do, my camera ends up in a stroller or something like that. This camera is so small I can keep it on me and it's not in the way. And with this lens being so small, that is also the case. It doesn't make the camera big and bulky. So this lens, being that it is a Sony lens with the Zeiss glass coating, produces just beautiful photos. When taking landscapes with this, there is a little bit of distortion on the edges, not much at all from what you would expect on a wider, on a lens with a wider focal range. So 35mm with a lot of lenses, you do get a little bit of distortion because it's a wider lens. However, this lens does a fantastic job of keeping that under control. And then of course in Lightroom, you can fix any issues that you do get by just applying the camera correction profile that's available for this specific lens. Being able to go down to 2.8 aperture, or as wide as a 2.8 aperture, is a big deal for me. I shoot a lot of weddings and my kids in lower light situations where being able to go down to that 2.8 is fantastic. Having 2.8 on the A7S means you're basically, there's no limitations for your low light photography. Because of the ISO sensitivity of this camera, you can shoot anywhere. I have also used this lens on the A7 II, which is not as good in low light as far as the camera goes, but has stabilization on the sensor. This particular lens does not have any stabilization, which is kind of a bummer, but adding it onto the A7 II gives you that stabilization on the sensor, which makes up for that. A lot of prime lenses don't have image stabilization built into them. So with this lens being 35mm, it's worked out relatively well. Even if you take off the lens hood, the lens gets even smaller. The lens hood is relatively small, and I didn't even really recognize it as a lens hood at first because it's not typical to a standard lens hood, which protrudes quite a bit. This lens hood is very small and doesn't really get in the way. So with the lens itself, you have a 49mm ring that you can attach filters to. However, the lens hood itself also has the ability to add filters to it. It says 40.5 on the back, but I haven't measured it to confirm that that is the size of the filter that you would add to the front of this. If you were buying filters, I would recommend taking the lens hood off. Buy the filter to fit the lens rather than the lens hood. So this particular lens produces beautiful images, and considering the small package here, this is a huge selling point to most of us that are photographers who travel and move around. We're not studio per se photographers, though I do shoot in the studio sometimes. This small package is great. I actually, did in one instance have somebody ask me, if this camera was, just my kind of toy camera, because it's just so small and the lens is so small. But when I let them hold the camera, they realized that it is just a very nice quality camera and lens. It's not a toy. It's not a cheap entry level. It's actually a very powerful package combined with just beautiful glass that performs and takes fantastic images. So this particular lens, fantastic photos, pretty sharp edge to edge, haven't found any issues of degradation as you get to the edge of the photos in any situation that I've thrown it in. Even in lower light situations, the photo still stays sharp from edge to edge, which is a huge plus. Not a whole lot of distortion at the edges. Yes, it has the typical 35mm situations when you're trying to take portraits of people, but a 35mm lens isn't necessarily a portrait lens. It's more of a landscape lens, or a lens that you would use for taking shots of groups of people or something like that. So those issues are just the fact that it's a 35mm lens, not the lens specifically here. So this lens, the price is definitely right. If you are a prime lens shooter, which means you predominantly like lenses that have a fixed zoom, there's no zoom, which is the case with this one, then you're absolutely gonna love this lens, and it is a must-have for your bag. Even though it is tiny as far as the size of the lens, do not discount it as a lens that cannot perform on par with its, similar focal range lens for a Canon or something like that. I have a 35mm lens for my Canon, and I don't see really any differences between the photos. They're both beautiful, and the 35mm lens for the Canon is definitely more expensive than this one. So if you're looking for a good lens to add to your E-mount line, this is definitely a lens that you must have. Take a look at the pictures that, of course, I've put in this video, and then there are a lot of pictures over on my website as well that have been taken with this lens. It's just a fantastic lens considering its size and its cost. So thanks for checking out this video. If you have any questions about this lens, leave them or ask them below, as well as you could follow me on Twitter at Jared Hill, and we can have a discussion about this lens or any of this camera stuff over there. Thanks a lot for checking out this video, and we'll see you next time.